Welcome to The Golden Flower. Join Angela Levesque and myself, Gemma Kauffman, as we explore the beauty of living a creative life and dive into the depths of consciousness, the archetypal journey, and the artistic process. Through insightful personal stories and inspiring conversation, we invite you to expand the parameters of your being and trust the aliveness within. This is The Golden Flower, a sanctuary for your creative soul.
Welcome to the Golden Flower podcast, a catalyst for your creative life. I am Angela Levesque, a digital artist, meditation teacher, wordsmith, and transformational guide based in Boise, Idaho.
Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm an abstract painter and I'm a creative coach and I'm in Portugal.
Well, today we are talking about, I guess, in a sense, what this entire podcast is about, but we're talking about creativity as self-development. So we're not just talking about using art or the creative process or creativity to express oneself, but that opening ourselves up to the creative force is a vehicle for accessing and activating deeper parts of who we are. And it helps us to transmute and transcend whatever it is that is going on in our lives. So it's about leaning into the emotion instead of just witnessing it or avoiding it. There's such a tendency right now in today's world to avoid uncomfortable feelings at all costs. We've just become a society that's uncomfortable being uncomfortable. And today we're going to explore giving ourselves permission to be as intense as necessary. Because this is a creativity podcast, we like to start off with an excerpt or passage. Today we have a quote by James Hillman. And Gemma, you're going to do the honors of reading today's creative passage.
Yeah, so James Hillman, adept psychologist who loved working with the work of Carl Jung and has this wonderful way of sharing his ideas. Like he's taken Carl Jung's work forward. I don't know if forward is the right word, but he has his own take on it. So this quote is, "Not just any talk is conversation. Not any talk raises consciousness. Good conversation has an edge. It opens your eyes to something. It quickens your ears. And good conversation reverberates. It keeps on talking in your mind. Later in the day and the next day, you find you're still conversing with what was said. That reverberation afterwards is the very raising of consciousness. Your mind's been moved. You are at another level with your reflections." Yeah. And the key bits in here are this notion of reverberation, that the echoes and repeats and the different angles, and that something is activated and continues to keep showing up within your system, and that gives you the opportunity to have a very deep quality of reflection, of self-reflection. And that this really is the key to the boost of consciousness. And for me anyway, if we're talking about self-development and creativity, it's like that's what speaks to me. Like when we have a level of self-reflection that really boosts our consciousness, our awareness goes to a whole other level, then things are really moving.
Well, I want to dive deeper into that idea, especially there's a few points that I'd like to explore later on too about the energy of the creative force and this idea of raising consciousness. So we will get back to that after a short break. Hello, fellow seekers and creators. Thank you for listening to the Golden Flower Podcast, a sanctuary for your creative soul. If our podcast has awakened your imagination and you feel the creative impulse stirring, we'd be so grateful if you could leave a review or share an episode with a friend. Who knows, it might just be the spark they've been waiting for. And for those of you who want to go deeper, Join the conversation. Share your reflections, dreams, and creations with us using hashtag Golden Flower Podcast on Instagram. Your thoughts and projects matter. Let's play with the possibilities. Your creative life is calling. Okay, Gemma, I think we should start this conversation because we've talked before about using creativity as an expression of, what's going on inside of us, being able to express that outwardly. But today we're talking about creativity as self-development. So how do you see that as a different experience?
I think the difference is how we approach whatever it is that we're going to plug into, whether that's painting or writing or the voice. There's a sense of stepping into something unknown. Like we're not trying to create something specific. We are going on a journey of discovery. So even though we might know that, okay, I'm going to be painting, so okay, I've got a canvas here, or I'm going to have some kind of story that comes out of this, or song. How that's going to unfold, that's the bit that we really don't know. There's, like I say, there's this discovery that goes on, and something about that discovery and the unknownness is what wakes up the unconscious. So there's intention, but it's maybe different to knowing exactly what it is that you want to paint, or knowing exactly what it is that you want to write, or having a very specific outcome in mind. It's
like what you said about how this is different is that this is really about, I want to paraphrase, it's about really working too with the emotion. It's not necessarily, like you said, going to point A to point B, but it's about using, whether it is, painting or writing or whatever the modality is, using that as a way to sort of interface with the emotion. Now, since we have started this podcast and we've been putting ourselves out there, and for a while, since I got back from Japan, I had sort of been hiding myself. And so putting myself out there again has been tricky. Like we talked about resistance at the precipice in episode 4. I have still been having to work through that. And I had a lot of emotion, a lot of just, it honestly, it felt like this really thick, dense ball of anxiety, fear, like just this ball of, really, really heavy, dense emotions. And I was thinking about this topic coming up and how I could go and use what we're talking about, this leaning in, this amplification. It's giving ourselves permission to kind of dive into that, how I could, work with that emotion. And so I did try painting, because in my mind, you actually gave me a suggestion after about writing a story. And I think that is more my cup of tea for sure, more within my comfort. But I did try painting, but it wasn't, I actually didn't know how to modulate some of that emotion through painting, because I don't know how to paint very well. And so there was this really weird tension between, I have all this stuff I want to express, and yet I don't know how to express it. And then I was getting in my head about how to create what I wanted to create. Anyway, so it was this whole thing. So what do you think about what I was just saying? And also, I'd like to know a little bit more about your process, and maybe share an example of you using this to interface with some of those more dense emotions.
I mean, you make a really important point, which is there's something we do need to be kind of familiar with the modality so that we can be in a easy, free flowy state. There's something a bit dreamy about like this. It's very close to active imagination, and Carl Jung describes this dreaming with our eyes open. So there's a kind of free association that goes on. So I feel, knowing you as a writer, that it makes sense that you would go into this writing, but perhaps it's like, what's the difference? I love what you were sharing there about the emotion. Let the emotion be the starting point, and I will definitely share some examples about how that has worked for me with my painting journey. So there's an emotional state, and the thing is, how do we begin? That's kind of like the question. And what's coming up for me now is like quite key, and I'd almost forgotten this, is that it can almost be arbitrary, random, or accidental. Once you initiate this process, which is the feeling is really present and I'm not running away from it, I'm taking it to the canvas, I'm taking it to my notebook, and I'm going to write, or I'm going to start typing. And it's just like, throw something at it, so there's something to work with, because then it's just like, I feel like that's the key that unlocks the door, or that's kind of like the first step of what happens. Is like, we have to have something to work with, and it really doesn't matter at all what it is. So you could pull some words out of a newspaper or a magazine. This is how random it really can be to get it going. And like with me, when I'm painting, I will literally just grab a color randomly, not even look to see what it is, and just go in. It's just like, so you go in, and it's kind of like that ritual beginning. It's just like, throw something and let it begin, and have that kind of questing feeling of let it begin. And you're immersed in that emotion, right? As well, that emotion is present and it's permeating. And so there's a kind of way that we move with that as well. And then once you've got something to work with, you can kind of sit back. It's kind of a seat of witnessing consciousness, where there's this combination of the emotion that you're experiencing, and then what you're allowing is, it's a slightly meditative state. It's not passive. This is really key. It's like, we don't kind of just go into the emotion and get like flippant about it. You can get a bit like, all right, so I'm supposed to just feel this, or let me just feel this. It's a sensitive, delicate thing. It's just like, it's almost like you've been hired to do a very specific job. This is what's different. It's just like, you're in the emotion. I think we'll go with your writing example. Like, you're just throwing out words, sentences, you're letting it be surreal, and you just keep going with that surrealness, and you let it not make sense, and you let it not make sense. And at some point, you bring in the fact that you know how to work with words. You activate that part of you that is the storyteller, and you will start weaving and moving more in, and then you bring more up from your inner world, and you get more material to work with, and you just keep going like this. And the same is, when I'm painting, at some point there's enough going on that it activates me, the painter, that I need to start problem solving this, so this, it does require us to be familiar and able to kind of almost on autopilot. Like, you can sculpt words almost on autopilot. You can start writing things together in a pleasing way without trying too hard. I can also arrange color without trying too hard. There's that kind of like flowing. You're not passive, but you're not controlling. You're not trying to control what's happening. You're working with what's happening. That's what the permission is. It's the permission for things to arise and for you to kind of assemble them, work with them. And then there's that free association that starts going on, that even though things can seem a bit random and arbitrary, your consciousness, because you can't turn that meaning-making, sense-making machine off, is going to start synthesizing things, and things are going to start coming through. When I'm painting, it's such a fine line between abstraction and narrative. Like, sometimes I'm like really in a in a story. I'm in a story, but I'm also in abstraction. Maybe that's another, don't need to complicate that. Does that help? Like if you imagine going in?
I actually like the idea of being in, allowing yourself to be in the story. And that story can be told, like I recently just wrote something for my Substack about will you dance? And I'm not a good dancer, but I know that my body likes to move. And I know, you know, that I feel like I'm part of something. And so there's that, like you said, there's that creative tension between being active, but not being in control, and allowing whatever it is, that creative force, to start embodying you fully. And so that to me is like the perfect state to be in, to transmute energy, to take that big ball of dense fear and, you know, whatever that combination was, and be able to kind of to move with it, to work with it. It first allows you, I think the first step is experiencing it, you know, having that expression, but then eventually you start to transmute it. And so I like the idea of it being a story, because that to me engages all of us, right? It's not just our intellect, but it's also it's the feminine and the masculine. It's weaving together, it's movement, but it's also taking something that's nebulous and abstract, and it starts moving it into sort of a cohesive place that allows you to transmute it. And I think that it doesn't start that way. Like I like what you said, it's sort of a like a gateway or a portal, like whatever it is, you kind of throw it down and allow yourself to move through those spaces until it starts to take shape and allows, and at that point there's opportunity for transmutation, or that's where that transmutation happens, is all of a sudden then you start moving with the creative force in a more intentional way. So I think that's beautiful.
What came to mind is that there's an innocence about story. There's an innocence about, or that maybe the word is natural. There's a naturalness about story. There's a playfulness. There's something almost childlike that can come through. And stories move. They move us. And I know that that's why I talk about going between abstraction and story. Is it's the story that keeps me going, even though, you know, I might be expressing through marks and symbols, but every mark and texture and gesture is kind of telling the story. Like, and it's a story that if you came and, you know, pressed pause whilst I'm amidst it and said, "What's going on, Gemma?" I'd be like, no, there's just absolutely no way that it's impossible. It's not just that I'm not capable of it. It's not that kind of expression. It's like it would be like a bubble just popping that was just like happening right there between me and the painting, kind of thing. I think the difference between that sense of embodiment, which is the other thing that moves, is the emotion. We know that also has a movement about it. So the combination of a starting point of emotion and then going into story and throwing things down, and then kind of following the flow a little bit. That's the delicate bit. It's like we're kind of holding the whole thing a little bit lightly and still bringing our kind of sensibilities. Very loud motorbike. Did you hear that?
A little bit.
Yeah. Wow. I think another part of this, and why this goes further than when we're in more mind-based type reflection, is that there's a lot of unresolved things in all of us, and especially if, you know, if you're a sensitive being, if you're maybe struggle to know where you end and others begin, and lots going on. If you feel like there's an intensity that goes with that, and it makes sense to me that the remedy is also that intensity, and creating the space means that things that are incomplete have a chance to come into that space, and they can complete, and we never really have to know consciously what's happening. I think it's almost like you're practicing being able to activate this state within yourself and give it permission to keep going. And it's like the creative happening makes that whole thing a lot more anchored. It gives it shape and form, and there's something on the other side of it. So whether you have something in front of you to enjoy, like the painting, or you're reading something, and it's such a discovery. It's like, even if you've been painting, I could never see a painting until I'd have to go away and then come back. It's such a surprise to see it. And you know this as well, being a dancer, it's just like on the other side of all that movement, you feel like you're kind of reborn. You're like, you don't quite know where you are. It's like, I've just gone through something and popped out the other side. It's so different to go through on that kind of level than it is to be in the head.
Well, and that's why I use the word specifically transmutation versus like transcendence or transformation, because it's really, at least for me, it's really about taking something and moving with it, and it taking on a different form than after, right? And I think that that is something that can't be like intellectualized. It can't be, you can't just move your way through like talking about it. And so that's why I specifically like that word transmutation, because you are taking one thing and then turning it into a different form through whatever it is, whatever your space is. And I also want to talk a little bit about that idea of the raising consciousness. And like, from an energetic perspective, our creative center is our second chakra, which is also our center of sexuality. It's also our emotional center. So we have all of these things that are coming together, and that what's necessary about the energy in the sacral chakra is you go from source energy, which is your root chakra, into relationship. Everything becomes relational. So you can't understand yourself until you're in relationship to something else. And so, yeah, so that's where you start to see the weaving of the divine masculine and the divine feminine coming together, but it's all relational. And that's why, so when we think about sexuality, when we think about creativity, when we think about like learning emotional, like our a relationship to emotion, all of that is happening in the same space. So it makes sense to me that we would use like the artistic process, we would use that journey to explore what's going on in our emotional world. That makes so much sense to me. That is really a beautiful thing. And I also have this weird thing with my husband. Not to get too personal, but I'm like, sometimes we don't have to talk our way through this. Sometimes we can just have a physical experience without getting too graphic. Like, just transmute this energy. There's no, like, I say this to my girlfriends, I'm like, sometimes you don't have to talk about it. Just get physical, like explore that, like transmute that energy. Because once you've decided that you were in this for the long haul, there's going to just be places where you're different. There's just going to be places where you see the world through different lenses. And as long as you respect that, that other person sees it a different way than you, take that frustration or whatever it is and just work it out physically. Like, and I sometimes I get really good response to that, and sometimes I don't. But that's another way, because it's all that center, right? It's sexuality, it's creativity, it's emotion, and a lot of the language that area speaks is not something that you can vocalize or intellectualize.
These are such cool points that you're making. I want to get back on them. This whole thing about the relationship, that you can't really know yourself without the relationship. I mean, having something mirrored back to you, and what you're saying as well about the trap that we fall into with relationships. Let's talk it out, let's talk it out. And sometimes that's just like the worst thing. And I think what really helps not to fall into that trap is that, I don't know, I can talk for me. It's like one of my big pain points for such a long time was just feeling like, why am I'm never going to be understood by anyone. And it was such a place. But then it's like, but I don't understand myself. I didn't understand myself until I began my creative journey. And this paintings, like, how to talk about this. I mean, I've been finding words for the alchemy of what's happened on my painting journey, but I feel like I was seeking this quality of attention and of being seen and of being heard and of being known that I just couldn't find, and then I found it through painting. I kind of found it in that mirroring of, and it kind of doesn't make sense. Like, how does an abstract painting give you all of that? I'm still trying to find the words so that it can make sense, but it did. There was a deeply healing, deep need met in that mirroring, and that has really freed me up when it comes to relationships, because I'm able to find ways to meet that for myself, so that is not such a pressure to put on, close relationships. So yeah, I think that's so key to what I found with these. I call them containers. Is that a confusing word to say, containers? The idea of a container of creativity, the idea that there's a space, even if there is a real space between you, the creator, and your creation, but there's also like this imaginal space that gets really, really lively. It gets really, really charged up. Yeah.
No, and even going back to the second chakra, right? That's the womb.
Right.
That's the womb. So that is the ultimate container, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important point about moving and having interfacing with these emotions in a safe container. I think that is an important piece of this. And
it's huge.
Yeah.
That phrase, interfacing with emotions through creativity, like maybe that should be the title of the podcast. I feel like that is much more spot on for what we're talking about here.
And the quality of the container is important. Like when I think about, I don't know if I ever published it, but I wrote this article once about Twitter is not a healthy womb. It was back when Twitter was Twitter and not X, because people are trying to have this experience of expression and that sort of thing, but the container is not fit for purpose. And so it's really turned into this very destructive, kind of the pulling out like the lowest of all people, like the most debased aspects of of humanity. And that's because the container for that, maybe way long ago, maybe the container was set up with, the right ingredients for it to be a nurturing place, but it's really, it no longer is that. And so I think when we talk about using creativity as self-development, we do have to be intentional about the container that we're creating to work through this stuff, because that really does matter, and it affects what you're able to do.
Yeah, it's huge. Parameters are, I mean, I don't know if we can ever look at social media as it's just too enormous. That's my problem with it. There are no boundaries. It doesn't feel safe at all. But you know, I tend to think of this work as being like solo introspection, self-reflective, personal work. But it's the kind of work that without the interface, without the painting, the drawing, the dance, the voice to move through the emotion, we need to hit against something so that we can see ourselves in that expression, to get that bounce back. Like, that's the reverberation. That's going back to the quote from the beginning. It's like, that's where the learning is happening. That's where the reabsorption is happening. That's where that next level of reflection is happening. And that is how things become completed, you know, when we start, you know, when there's a shift in perspective, we're no longer stuck at a certain level of our perception, then we can move things. That's the development. That's what's available. But this is so key, that we do need a border, a boundary, a container to bounce off, to get the feedback, and to be relaxed and safe enough, because this type of thing is a little bit confrontational. Like, you know, when I would go and do these paintings, it was such a relief to allow all of my intensity to play out. But like, if I'm honest about what that means that, you know, all that stuff that's constantly trying to keep a lid on the small-minded stuff that I want to the disassociation, the stuff that I don't want to be involved with the resentment or the jealousy or the hurt, or, you know, these things that, you know, they're like the icky things. But oh, I've had such incredible experiences with witnessing what I, quote unquote, what these voices within have got to say about this stuff, and I just let them go. Just that it's safe to let them go, you know, because there's action, there's movement, there's this transmutation. Sometimes I describe it like transcribing a feeling. And I think what really makes this kind of journey work is not to spring it onto ourselves without any kind of warm-up. You know, I'm the kind of person that's always got a notebook. I think you are too, right? You know, there's this constant letting ourselves know that, you know, that uncensored splurge, I call it. Like, it's important to keep that active, because then when the time comes to do this deeper level, it's not completely unfamiliar. I think that's really like the first step, because, you know, my notebooks are incredible reflections, and I don't know how I'd have managed to you know, over the years, it's become really clear to me that, I mean, anytime that I've got something to do and I get a bit blocked, I have to sit down and draw, because it's just straight away, I know from experience that if there's something going on and I don't know what it is, and I haven't got the time or the resources to find it, if I can just stay with that feeling and put it into a drawing, even if it's just like a few moments, just creates enough space. And then it's almost like I get the, okay, I'm going to do this. And all, you know, journaling, I mean, we can talk, there's so many approaches to get that going, but
Well, I think that that's one of the kind of worst mind viruses of the new age spiritual community, is this idea that everything needs to be like high vibe. Everything has to be positive. You have to go to the love and light. And
gives me the shiver.
sometimes we're dealing with fear and jealousy and rejection and abandonment and whatever it is, some of those really dense, heavy feelings. And I think it really having a, process like this where you can dive into that is important, because not everything, we can't just immediately go to the lesson or the silver lining or oh, there must be a reason for this. We still have to deal with those embodied emotions. And I think that, in that regard, like New Age spirituality has done a huge disservice to people, because we still have those very, very visceral emotions that need to be explored. And I can think of no like healthier way to explore them than through what we're talking about today. Well, we're going to talk about ways that we can really explore those with our challenge this week. So if you're like us, you like frameworks, you like to dive into, self-exploration, and stick around as we talk about this week's creative challenge. Hello, fellow seekers and creators. Thank you for listening to the Golden Flower Podcast, a sanctuary for your creative soul. If our podcast has awakened your imagination and you feel the creative impulse stirring, we'd be so grateful if you could leave a review or share an episode with a friend. Who knows, it might just be the spark they've been waiting for. And for those of you who want to go deeper, join the conversation. Share your reflections, dreams, and creations with us using hashtag Golden Flower Podcast on Instagram. Your thoughts and projects matter. Let's play with the possibilities. Your creative life is calling. Well, this is our last portion of all of our podcasts. We like to do explore frameworks, challenges, exercise, those sorts of things that allow us to go deeper into ourselves in our work. Today, we are going to talk about this amplification exercise. And let Gemma take this away. And
yeah, I have a question for you, Angela. Like, are we using your example as the exercise?
Sure. Yeah, we can do.
Do you mind sharing it about this resistance around the news? Oh, and we touched on it earlier. It came up, right?
Yes. Well, so we can even get more specific. So I have this weird hang up about sending out newsletters. Like I really
I have it too.
I really dislike it. And I've done a lot of intellectual work on this, a lot of root digging, mostly everything. If I go all the way underneath it, it has to do with not enoughness, that sort of thing. And so I still know that, and yet I still have a tremendous amount of anxiety and a lot of just super dense emotions around it. And so what I usually do is just power through it. I do it. I don't like it. And this time, because of we've really been stretching ourselves, putting out this podcast and guest posting and having all these things that have really been like, I feel stretched a lot lately. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to lean into it. I'm going to take this opportunity to like dive into those intense emotions rather than just power through. So I'll let you.
Yeah, thank you for the sharing. It resonates so much. I'm also having major kickback about me talking about this stuff without actually giving myself the opportunity to do the painting and everything that we're talking about. So let's look at a challenge that brings us both to that place where we're getting to experience the kind of things that we're talking about. So, so the challenge is wherever there's a kind of a clash, resistance, stuckness, or you talked about dense emotion. I think that is probably applicable across the board, that we hit on some kind of dense emotion. It's confusing to us. It doesn't tell us its name, right? It's just kind of there. It's this heavy emotion. It's just like that as a starting point to go in. So the invitation is, choose the modality that you feel most relaxed and comfortable in. If it's just doodle drawing, do that. If it's writing, do that. If it's using your voice movement, do that. And we talk about amplification. So we'll take Angela's example of the newsletter. So a suggestion is get that storyteller and go in big, intensify it. So suggestions for the story could be, again, I quite like that random starting point, and it might take you off in a completely different place. So I don't know if you've ever done things where you just like randomly cut some paragraphs out or sentences out of some magazines. I'd be really curious to see how that could work out. The other thing is that you can set yourself a kind of challenge, which is I'm going to write a really intense story about someone who hates sending letters, like and I'm going to go big on it. I'm taking it seriously, but I'm not. The other thought that comes to mind is like, so she hates sending letters. Why? What happened? What were the consequences? Who is she writing to? Like, just give yourself the job to be like, how do I pad this out? Like, I know how to do that for other stories. Let me do it for this one without getting too involved in the content. You're not trying to direct it. You're not trying to control it. You're trying to stimulate it so that it comes up, and then you just kind of work with it. And then you can flip it around and be like, what about someone who likes to send letters too much? Like, they just can't stop doing it. Like, they're just obsessed. And why would they? She just won't leave people alone. She's just sending stuff all the time, all the time. What is the circumstance? What's the situation? What happened in the past? Where's this going in the future? Just let loose. And it's a bit like, this, oh, I couldn't write that. Yes, write that. Oh, I couldn't say that. Yes, say that. It's that permission thing of wherever there's that feeling of like contraction, like, oh, that's ridiculous, or that's shocking, or that's absurd. Just like, no, this is the permission that I'm giving for this exercise to do this. So amp it up, let the drama. I think when I was preparing for this and I was using the word intense a lot, I was like, do I sometimes hide behind intensity when I'm actually referring to my internal drama? Like, there's plenty of internal drama, as sensitive people with a lot going on, like, and I've found a lot of peace with that drama by giving it a voice, giving it a space. And I think as well, I'm having a day today with that knotty, tight feeling here, and it's been too long since I've had the experience of like plugging that into some, even if it's not like abstract painting like the ones I've got behind me, even if it's just small scale watercolors out, I'm going to see where that can go. So that's our challenge. And if you're listening, just whatever it is that's giving you that dense ball of stuck energy, plug it into something that feels familiar, amplify it, peak it out, give yourself permission. Yes, more, keep going until there's something there, and then let that do the work. We won't get into what happens when it's there. That's a journey for another chat.
Well, I'm excited. I want to follow up with us next week because I think that this is valuable and very powerful. And yeah, see where I love that idea of just throw something down, start. And for me, that might just be throwing some words on a paper. It might be phrases. It might be just let that be a way to like connect first with the energy, and then you're really going on a journey. And so I'm excited to see where that journey takes us. If you would like to join us on this journey, regardless of when you listen to this podcast, we created some hashtags. So hashtag TGF Intense. TGF is the golden flower. So anytime that you want to interact with us or an exercise, start it off with TGF so it's more searchable. So yes, this week's is TGF Intense. If you want to know more about Gemma, you can go to Gemma Kauffman Art. Is that right? .com?
No, GemmaKauffman.com is my website. Gemma Kauffman is my art on Instagram. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. You can find me at Chaos in Light. Connect with us at Golden Flower Podcast on Instagram and the Golden Flower YouTube channel. We put all of our videos there. And then you can find our podcasts wherever podcasts are found. Well, that is our show for today. Follow the aliveness, nurture that spark, and have a great week.